guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for the audience today, Greg Barnsdale. He's an author. He's got a very inspiring story after a career helping people plan and prepare for their own deaths. He's written a book called "Do Not Ignore Your Own Mortality." He'll talk about that, and he'll talk about his tremendous story. And I'm really happy to have him on the show. So, Greg, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story and hopefully inspire your listeners.
Yeah, I know we had. So I always love these heartfelt, inspiring stories. So, talk about your journey, how you got started. We'll dive right into the conversation.
Sure. Well, I started off my career as a young funeral director here in Ontario, Canada, back in the 1980s. And I worked in that career for quite some time for large and small funeral homes. And then I wanted a bit of a change. I wanted something more lively, actually. So I shifted and became a financial advisor and then ultimately became a certified financial planner. And all of my financial planning clients knew my background as a funeral director, but I always knew at some point, Chris, I would be able to somehow find a way to take all of my funeral experience and merge it with the financial planning experience and somehow create something that would really help people. And I tried so many things that it didn't work. And then I finally figured out that writing a good book would be a great way of really getting this message across. And it's really just a quick conversation starter that reinforces the importance of proactive planning.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the more you plan, the better off you'll be. So, talk about kind of the most common mistakes people make, in your line of work. And I know what's interesting is, I love talking to the older generation. They just kind of, one of the biggest thing is, this idea of regret versus fear of failure. So talk about, kind of the things that, your clients help do to help prepare themselves.
Well, those two terms, regret and fear, are very close to my heart because I've had these types of conversations working as a funeral director so many times, Chris, especially from the standpoint of seeing both types of situations at the time of a death. Situations where the deceased had planned everything, had their funeral all pre-planned. They had the music picked out, they had the pallbearers picked out, and everything was organized. They had their will and had talked to their family long before they died about what they wanted to happen. But unfortunately, what I saw working as a funeral director in all kinds of different areas, and as I said, for large and small funeral homes, the type of situation that was much more prevalent, unfortunately, was the situation where people had not planned and they didn't know what the deceased wanted in many cases. And it created so much turmoil and stress and frustration. And the fallout from that type of situation can be a disastrous mess that can last an awfully long time.
Kind of the next question I have for you is, talk about your book and kind of what made you write it. And I know because you have kind of the top 5 key themes that your book delves into.
Yes, well, as I mentioned before we started recording this, Chris, I have tried a number of things throughout my financial planning career and also throughout my funeral career as well in trying to create something that would really help people, because I think I've got some unique experience that most people don't have in a couple of very important industries. And plus added to that, after this whole career of stressing to people the importance of having their final affairs in order and having a current and valid will and life insurance being updated and beneficiary designations and the role of an executor and all those things. 2 months after I published this darn thing, I was diagnosed with a large brain tumor myself, and I've got a 6-inch scar up the side of my head where I had the tumor taken out just over a year ago. Fortunately, it was non-cancerous, and I've been given a second chance, but it certainly adds to my story about the importance of this type of planning.
And what were the kind of the key realizations that you had, after going through this, through, your diagnosis and your treatment and, writing the book, kind of, if you had a kind of a younger person come up to you and be like, what is the meaning of life? Or, what are the top key takeaways that you would tell them?
Well, the most important thing, Chris, that I learned out of this, and I knew this before I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, was that it's so vitally important for us to be prepared for these sorts of things. I had my will in place. I had my power of attorney, my medical directives, my life insurance, and everything in place before I was diagnosed with this brain tumor. And I've said this to many people since. I cannot imagine rushing and trying to get all those estate planning steps properly in place with a clear mind with a health diagnosis like that on your plate. It's something that needs to be done proactively when time is plentiful and minds are clear and emotions are not running way up here. And people who leave these sorts of things thinking, well, it's not going to happen to me, it's going to happen to the other guy. But when something like this does happen, it can really throw you for a loop. And rushing to get these things done, it's incredibly difficult.
Too is thank goodness you're here today, and because I know a lot of the when I one of the big things was I volunteered in a nursing home when I was in a teenager, and one of the biggest realizations was that they these residents, they would tell me, I wish I had I wish I had done X instead of, I wish I had, a lot of this idea of just this idea, the heaviness of regret versus this, the weight of the fear of failure. Kind of talk about that as we go through life and make decisions.
Yes. Well, when you talk about that, and I've had those same types of conversations too, Chris, with older people, and I think we all have regrets of in some form or another relating to each of us. But I think of what I had heard Tony Robbins say some time ago, and he called it his rocking chair test. And when he had something that he was trying to make a decision on, whether he should proceed or perhaps not proceed with an idea or an opportunity, he would think ahead years down the road and try and think of what his mindset, what he would think at that point when he was elderly, sitting in a rocking chair, looking back on his life from the perspective of, should I have really, how would I feel if I didn't do this? And quite
Yeah.
often, it leads people, I think, to take those types of opportunities and push through their fears. And that's something I certainly had to do with this brain tumor that I was diagnosed with. But I think it's created a bigger opportunity for me because I think I've now got an incredibly compelling message.
It reminds me of I was reading these articles about Jeff Bezos, and he was saying that when he created Amazon, he wanted to look back and be like, what are the kind of like the reversible, like the small inconsequential reversible decisions versus decisions that are kind of more consequential and irreversible. And he would take a look, and when he decided to start Amazon, it was like what, when he looks back on his life, what are the things he wishes he had not done, and then kind of reverse engineer that. And so for him, he could quit his high paying hedge fund job to start Amazon. So the other question I have for you is, you're in Canada and I'm in the States. One thing I've realized is, this Western concept, it can be healthy, but a lot of times it's come to the point where it's kind of quite toxic. So, it's like we're fighting over money, status, things, land, resources. We're fighting other people, we're fighting other countries. It's kind of like this. And then, so talk about this idea of, all these things and in the context of, the broader context, the bigger picture of life.
Well, it relates to the core message, Chris, that I'm often sharing with people now. This whole aspect of us wanting to create something throughout our lives that we will be remembered for, I think is very significant. because we're all here to make a difference. And I think we're ultimately here to help other people, really. But the core of my message in that we shouldn't be ignoring the delicate nature of our life, our mortality, is that it helps us live more fully in the moment. But the planning ahead, the estate planning and all of these sorts of things that we have just talked about, Chris, actually does something else, a number of other important things too. It helps reduce the stress of aging, which is a huge factor. But the results are of proper planning is that it also results in leaving our survivors more financially and emotionally resilient and more likely to get along after we die.
And a follow-up question on that is, this facing mortality as a catalyst for life changes, and how can acknowledging one's mortality serve as a powerful motivator for making significant life changes, and share some real life examples?
Well, life can seem awfully short. I've seen a lot of situations. I've been to many situations, Chris, to actually physically pick up the dead. As I said, I've worked in the funeral industry as a licensed funeral director, and I've also worked for one of the largest mortuary agencies in all of Canada, working with forensics teams, et cetera. And I think a lot of people just don't realize that death is really all around us all the time. But people typically are tuned out and they don't think it's going to happen to them. They're not in any rush to set up their will. These statistics are still very appalling that in all across Canada and through the States and in many other countries, the numbers, the percentage of adults that actually have a current and valid will are very, very low. And it's astonishing that in such an advanced culture as that we live in here in North America, that more people aren't leaning into this sort of thing for their own good and for their family.
The next question I have for you is, how do people overcome the fear of death? It's a common challenge, and what strategies do you suggest for how people can overcome this fear and live more fully and present?
Well, I think it really comes down to the fact, Chris, of realizing that we can't change it. We don't know how long we're going to be here. But this could be the last time, Chris, you and I see each other. We have no idea. We can't predict the future. But I do realize that a lot of people are superstitious and they are reluctant to talk about these things because they may feel that it may bring bad luck to them. Some people may consider myself bringing bad luck to myself with this brain tumor that I was diagnosed with. But I don't believe that. I've talked and met many, many people that have worked in various end of life type roles who have lived long, enjoyable lives. I don't buy into that type of philosophy, but I do also think that a lot of people aren't sure where to turn. They feel overwhelmed by these types of conversations. And even some studies actually prove that there's a fair number of people that think bringing up these types of conversations, especially in regards to money with their children or other family members, will actually cause infighting. So they put it off and in some cases do nothing.
And follow you and reach out to you.
Well, I'm all over social media. The best way to find me, though, Chris, is through my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com. People
Yeah.
can reach out to me through also LinkedIn and actually on TikTok under author Mortality. And I have a quick story about TikTok. Shortly before my surgery, my stepdaughter said to me, Greg, you should take that video that you recorded just after you told my mom that you had a brain tumor. And at that point, Chris, I didn't know it was non-cancerous. I recorded it in our driveway sitting in the vehicle. And I put it on TikTok as my stepdaughter suggested, and it blew up. It's been viewed over 1.7 million times, and people can see that. Author Mortality on TikTok. But isn't it astonishing that my little video where I talked about if this tumor is cancerous, I have some very serious decisions to make, it was viewed so highly, yet so many people don't have a current and valid will.
And I encourage the audience to check out Greg's book and his socials. Give him a like and follow, and really interesting conversation. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time today,